Let's be honest, it sounds incredibly atmospheric and alive. Now this makes you want to tear through everything inside and strike absolute terror into the spawns of hell, and here, words are just useless. Let's establish one thing right now. Soundtracks and audio design aren't just the background noise, they are an inseparable, foundational part of any game. But the most depressive thing about them, we don't actually remember most of the music from the games we play. Think about a game you finished just a couple weeks ago. If you try really hard, you might remember maybe 2 or 3 tracks at most. What makes one game stick in your memory forever, making it experience completely unforgettable? So that's the second you hear a single note, you instantly go, oh, that's from. Meanwhile, in other massive projects, we barely even notice the music. And look, it's not because the composers or sound designers didn't work hard. The truth is, all memorable original soundtracks share one specific trait: authenticity. Thanks for watching, video is over. Alright, don't look for the exit just yet, because behind this incredibly obvious, almost cliché word lies an insane amount of depth. Today I am going to show you what makes certain games absolutely inseparable from their music. We're talking about complex technical engineering, why do some soundtracks stay with you forever, while other feels like nothing more than background noise. What unites the dark ambience of Metro series, Argent Metal Doom games, and Pirate Folk of Assassin's Creed 4? We will look at the lyrical, cozy guitar riffs of Metro Exodus, the heroic yet deeply tragic themes of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and the hellish industrial riffs of Doom, and why one sound is enough to create a legendary soundtrack.
Change the process, change the outcome.
It was exactly this approach that helped Mick Gordon create his unique blend of dubstep, djent, and industrial metal. And in the end, he managed to bring guitars back into soundtrack, even though the developers wanted to move away from the whole heavy metal shotguns and demon image. I want to start with the loudest, most aggressive example on our list today. With all due respect to the other authors, we have to talk about the bone-crushing audio of Doom, and the man who dragged an entire underground subgenre into the mainstream. I will never forget the moment a friend told me to boot up Doom Eternal, and I hear the main menu theme for the first time. At first it felt typical for the genre, just some MIDI metal emphasizing the game brutal vibes, but then something clicked, something felt fundamentally different. It was the exact moment the music stopped being a part of the game and straight up became its life force. Instead of relying on standard formulas, writing a predictable track with an intro, verse, chorus, verse structure, the Doom soundtrack delivered something entirely dynamic. It acts like a living organism within the game world. It doesn't play alongside your gameplay. As wild as it sounds right now, guitars were original enough though. In fact, the initial production mandate from developers was 0 guitars. They were terrified that standard heavy metal would turn a brutal modern shooter into cheesy, outdated 90s joke. Instead, he used a process called deconstruction. He asked himself a foundational physics question: what's guitar distortion at its core? It's the intentional destruction of an audio signal. When you overdrive an amplifier, you clip the peaks of the sound wave, flattening a smooth sine wave into harsh, aggressive square wave. So Mick decided to bypass the strings entirely. He generated perfectly sterling, clean digital sine waves inside the computer and routed them into a massive tangle web of real-world analog gear, filled with the vintage synthesizers and dozens of custom distortion pedals. Inside that maze of cables, the audio signal literally started eating itself alive, generating chaotic harmonics and wild feedback. What came out was a sentient, breathing industrial screech. It's changed completely with the slightest twist of a physical knob. When the dev team heard it, they folded immediately. You know what, Mick? Actually, let's add some guitars to this. Notice how the guitar returned to Doom not as a main star, but just as another ingredient in a horrifying analog blender. His 8-string and 9-string multiscale guitar sounds so incredibly heavy, angry and unique that the devs basically said, yeah, we're keeping this. In practice, he used 4 parallel effect chains to transform a basic sine wave into something entirely new. He was inspired by David Bowie's gated reverb technique, where multiple room mix open up depending on the volume to create a massive reverb effect. We see a similar logic here. To make the sound even grittier, he also injected noise. First chain was the core tone, starting with the various distortion pedals and ending with a signal splitter. Second one packed 2 unconventional distortions and 2 phasers to widen and enrich the texture. Third one combined delay, analog saturation and spring reverb. And the last one was a pure feedback loop, a guitar combo amp with a mic pointed directly at its speaker. Every chain except the first ended with its own compressor. He sidechained them to the splitter from chain 1, ducking the other layers to keep the main tone perfectly clear. Finally, this beautiful chaos wrapped up with a Smile Curve egg and a master compressor. So, Mick Gordon, inspired by Argent energy in lore of the game, literally captured the energy inside of his music.
Que tengo un buen día, señor.
Let's step out of the depths of hell and move to the Caribbean Sea. Before 2013, the Assassin's Creed franchise was known for Jasper Keith's majestic sci-fi, deeply melancholic music. But when Ubisoft decided to make a game about pirates, they brought on Brian Tyler, and he immediately ran into a wall of massive cliches. The entire modern stereotype of pirate music was built by Hans Zimmer in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's a classic Gulliver style, flawless, pristine symphonic orchestra with a massive brass section blasting epic heroic anthems. Brian Tyler realized that if he copied the formula, the game would lose all its authenticity. And here's the opening and title theme of the game. And what do we hear? A minor key, folk instruments, and a violin, producing a delicate, even darkly melancholic intro. But for just one bar, there's a shift from A minor to the parallel A major. What I love most is that this major shift happened right before the subdominant. This scale degree, already tense and unstable, becomes even more unstable because of this brief major lift. It's an amazing trick that shows Edward Kenway's double nature without any words, and sets the mood for the huge adventure ahead. Real pirates weren't heroes in spotless coats. They were outlaws, escaped slaves, and mutinous sailors living in dirt, scurry, and absolute squalor. The music needed to sound dangerous, raw, and completely grounded. Tyler went to war against studio perfection. When you start the game for the first time, the main theme sounds incredibly heroic, instantly wrapping you in sense of adventure. It feels like a bold classic pirate anthem, but if you listen to it again after finishing the campaign, the opening notes hit entirely different. The perception of that adventure completely shifts because the story is fundamentally tragedy. This emphasizes unstable nature of Edward Kenway's journey, signaling right from the start that the glamorous pirate life is nothing more than a fleeting illusion. Instead of hiring classical violinists, Tyler brought in folk fiddle players. Mechanically, a fiddle and violin are exact same instrument, but the execution is completely different. A classical violinist focuses on perfect intonation, controlled vibrato, and silky smooth bow strokes. A fiddler plays with a raw, traditional folk styling. They drawn on open strings, use sharp, aggressive bow strikes, and internationally welcome microtonal imperfections. Tyler added a Greek bouzouki to the mix, inject a metallic, piercing ring alongside historical wooden flutes. He pushed his musicians to play at the absolute limit of their speed, international living string bass, finger sliding on frets, and heavy breathing in final master track. The result? The main theme of Black Flag sounds exactly like it's being performed by a band of drunken, brilliantly talented cutthroats in smoky Tortuga Tavern. But the real crown jewel of the soundtrack is the sea shanties. In the 18th century, shanties weren't cheap entertainment. They were vital working tools. They were used to synchronize grueling manual labor. Sailors pulled heavy ropes or turned massive wooden capstans to the exact rhythm of the song. Ubisoft beautifully integrated this history into the core game loop. Song sheet drifted through town as collectibles. If you chased down and cut a sheet, your crew learned a brand new song. It transformed music into direct mechanical reward for world exploration. The secret to making these tracks feel alive was destroying all studio polish. Ubisoft hired incredible folk vocalists. Instead of separating them into isolated, soundproof booths with high-end microphones, they threw them all into a single room. They stood in a tight circle around just two microphones and sang together in real time. They bumped into each other, cut each other's eyes, and naturally adjusted their tempos on the fly. The audio team internationally left natural room resonance and minor phase inconsistencies in the recording. That's exactly why when you are sailing your ship through a massive storm, the voices of your crew sound so real. Unified and alive, you're hearing a group of men standing shoulder to shoulder, not perfectly polished audio tracks edited together by a sound engineer. If Doom is pure rage and Black Flag is lawless freedom, then the Metro series is pure melancholy. Composer Alexei Omelchuk scored the entire trilogy, but Metro Exodus presented him with a massive creative challenge. He had to write the sound for a complete shift in the game's sense of scale. In Metro 2033 and Last Light, the music was trapped underground. It was claustrophobic, suffocating ambient landscape filled with low-frequency drones, industrial ventilation hums, and the distant echo of dripping water. The audio constantly crushed the player, reminding them that stepping out the tunnels meant instant death. In Exodus, Artyom finally breaks out onto the surface. Suddenly, you have a massive train called Aurora, sprawling wide open horizons, changing time zones, and passing seasons. It's not hard to tell even just by listening to the sounds around you that the music and sound designer were composed in advance for carefully planned sense. The composers knew exactly what they were doing. In fact, you can almost follow the game's story just by looking at the titles in the official soundtrack. By the way, let's talk about the location of the game. In Volga, the music and sound freezing and cold. It relies on distant minor ambient pads and lonely ringing acoustic chords. The Caspian. The soundtrack pivots hard into dark country. Amelchik introduced microtonal slides, dobro guitars, and a harmonic minor scale with a raised 4-step, perfectly channeling the feeling of suffocating, dusk-choked desert heat. So in the taiga, it's fall. The music slows down, becoming softer and more emotional, perfectly matching the fading world and the final stretch of the journey. But the absolute best piece of sound design in Metro is the interactive guitar session aboard the Aurora. Between stressful, terrifying missions, you can freely walk the train cars, listen to a companion's talk, and sit down to play the guitar. Artyom guitar is beautifully imperfect, a couple of the strings are slightly out of tune, which makes total sense for post-apocalyptic wasteland. When you hit the prompt to play, the game softly ducks the ambient train noise and brings the raw, close-mic'd acoustic guitar straight to the front of the mix. In a nutshell, the music and audio design of Metro Exodus became more epic and grand in scale, filled with Gallivant-style drama that reflect the series' shift toward a global audience. Despite that slight Gallivant blockbuster feel, Alex's real strength lies in his minimalist guitar riffs, haunting ambient textures, and above all the main theme, the leitmotif that follows you throughout the entire game, like in Race Against Fate. More and more often, I find myself noticing that game soundtracks aren't necessarily getting worse or less interesting, they just becoming forgettable. Even if they still have 2 or 3 absolute bangers, some franchises have started losing their edge, and others that were supposed to become something truly outstanding ended up being just average. And then there are games that simply follow a path someone else already proved work, just wrap a different packaging. If you had to sum up every game I've talked about today, along with the ones that didn't make this list, even though some of them probably deserve to be here even more, they all have one thing in common. Their soundtracks don't just accompany the game, they work in perfect synergy with it. They are woven directly into experience. They are part of the game itself. And beyond of the games I covered today, there are plenty of even better examples where music literally makes you play better. So what do the soundtracks, each completely different in genre and tone, actually have in common? Every one of their composers choose to follow their own path. Sure, sometimes it might sound a little over the top, or even exactly what you would expect from the genre, but none of them were simply trying to make good music. They wanted to give their games a unique identity. Each of them redefined the genre they were working in their own way. And like I said before, uniqueness often hides in the small details. You can make a soundtrack that's well produced, heavy, even incredibly complex, but sometimes all it takes is a single sound to create something truly special. Every single game I have managed today deserves its own video, but since this is the only second video on my channel, I don't want to bite off more than I can chew. So if you have made it this far, thank you. Seriously, it means a lot. Your support is a huge motivation for me to keep making videos like this. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.